Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this panel. My name is Hala Gorashi. I am co-chairing this session together with Kai Mars, my colleague at the Free University, Amsterdam. All the presentations in this panel are connected to the projects we have initiated in the context of a co-creation space we call Refugee Academy. In 2015, when the issue of refugee inclusion became prominent, we realized that many academics and societal stakeholders had started to work on the issue without looking back to see what has been happening before and looking around to see what others were doing actually at the same time. We saw then the need to have an infrastructure that brings all these parties together and connects them to the experiences and narratives of the refugees themselves. By bringing different perspectives together, we hope to create space for the co-creation of practices that increase the inclusionary possibilities for refugees and their sense of belonging. We also developed many research projects from within Refugee Academy, some of which we will present here today. We start with a project about the importance of refugees' perspectives and voice in policymaking, which will be presented by Dr. Elena Punzoni. After Elena, we have three PhD researchers, Mimi Okades, Alex Green, and Fabian Holle, who have been part of a larger research projects on engaged scholarship and narratives of change, a comparative project engaging with refugees in South Africa, the US, and the Netherlands. Now about the practicalities of the session. Each presentation will be about 15 minutes. Then we have 1 or 2 minutes for informative questions. And then we have some space for discussion after all the presentations are done. You might want to put your questions in the chat so that the presenters can engage with them during the panel discussion. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this session as much as we do. And Elena will start with the presentation.
I see that the host has disabled the participants' screen sharing, so I cannot share my screen.
Could we get support from tech support?
Okay, I will just do the presentation without slides. Hello, everyone. Thank you for participating in our panel. In my presentation, I would like to talk about the connection between belonging and co-creation, departing from a research we're conducting on refugee-led advocacy in the Netherlands. I'm going to give this presentation also on behalf of Halle, who's chairing our panel. And our research focuses on what is the importance of involving the perspective of refugees in policymaking and what are the conditions to achieve this. I have to think about my slides because I don't have everything written down. So in the past years, there seems to be an increasing attention for including the perspective of refugees in policy, also on a global level. For instance, from the UN, there have been different documents that state the importance of this subject. The Global Compact of Refugees, for instance, states it. We see also the emergence of new international network of refugee-led organizations that are also supported by European institutions. So there's a lot going on around this subject around giving more space to refugee voice in the development of policies that concern them.
I'm sorry, Elena, maybe you can share now. There is, look if it's possible. Then you can skip the first two slides.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Oh, that's great, because the beginning I know, but yes. I think you can see it now. Okay, so I was talking about the fact that there's a lot going on around giving more space to refugee voices in policymaking. But why is it important to include the perspective of refugees? To relate to this question, I would like you to reflect on a quote that we've also been using in one of our publications. And it's a quote by members of the Global Refugee-Led Network. And they say, when someone asks us what is the actual importance of the participation of refugees in policymaking, we say, imagine that you lived, that where you lived, where you went to school, and where you worked was all determined for you without consulting you. You can imagine that this would lead to flaws, inefficiencies, and also solutions that do not match your wishes and experiences. So pause a second to consider this, what this would mean for you. Many refugees subjected to reception and integration policies have very little influence in decisions that structure to a great extent their daily life. So thinking about this helps us focus first on the fact that first-hand knowledge of refugees is needed to create policies that work, but also helps us on reflecting on what it means to belong in a place or in a society. So what does it mean to belong when you have so little influence in choices determining your life? So we connect belonging with the possibility of being seen as meaningful contributors of society. Floya Antias argues that belonging and societal inclusion are closely connected. However, the concern with belonging emerges when there's a sense of exclusion. This also became clear in different panels yesterday. So that belonging can be understood as feeling as a part of something, but when this being part is not taken for granted. So there's a tension that reflects both intimacy and distance, and which of course can take different shapes in different multidimensional experiences of belonging and that people can have in different contexts. So yeah, it's being a part when this is not taken for granted. And exactly this tension between belonging and non-belonging, we consider essential for refugee advocates to be able to bring perspective that, that enlarge the imagination of policymakers and are able to question the taken for granted. Also, Anne Phillips distinguishes between the politics of presence and the politics of ideas. So the politics of ideas entails that what is important is that there is space in decision making for ideas that increase equality and defend the interests of people from historically marginalized groups, regardless actually who's bringing these ideas to the fore. It's the ideas that count. While the politics of presence entails that we need the embodiment of these ideas in the actual presence of people situated in marginalized groups. As she argues that both are necessary. So we need the actual presence of people from historically excluded groups to make actual space for more equalizing ideas. Okay, but then what is this refugee voice, this refugee perspective, and what do we expect from it? We interviewed refugee advocates that are active in the Netherlands, some that are new in the field, and some advocates that have been active for decades. And what we see is that they are caught between two opposed expectations. So in many contexts, they are expected to be representative, to represent the needs and the views of large groups, while in other contexts, they are expected to tell their own individual story. And so, for instance, in the Dutch history of representation, in Dutch history, we had this consultation and advisory bodies for migrant and refugees, which were expected to represent entire communities. And this is difficult because first, it does not consider the diversity within groups, so it is essentializing. And this expectation often is unrealistic, so it undermines eventually the credibility of refugee advocates. And the other extreme is when refugees are only asked to tell their individual stories. Now, at present, in the Netherlands, we're seeing a strong focus on these individual stories. Refugees are invited often to tell their stories at meetings or in different contexts. And this can be easily instrumentalized, so being seen just as a personal anecdote and shifted aside, or used as a legitimation for specific policies when they do fit the desired policy frame. This does not mean that individual experiences are not relevant, as in some cases they can be actually very useful to challenge the assumption of policymakers in the context when there is enough space for their unsettling potential. So these individual stories can bring unexpected elements of experience that were previously not considered and not seen by policymakers. However, in our study, we argue that for contributors to have a more long-term impact, we actually need something more. So we need a voice that is more than individual and less than representative. So the main idea we are presenting here is that advocates who can have a distinctive impact are the ones who bring embedded narratives and that embrace their in-betweenness. And that these advocates can actually do more than just unsettling assumptions. They can co-create and think along with policymakers. So these advocates, they bring personal narratives, but of which many elements are also mirrored in the stories of fellow refugees from their network. So these are not representative narratives, but embedded narratives, embedded in relevant networks, which are kinds of networks that most policymakers miss. So it's more than just an individual story because it's interwoven with the stories of others that show a pattern. And so these advocates bring relational consciousness because they see the relevance of these patterns coming from shared experiences of being in the Netherlands. And also how these embedded stories bring a perspective that is lacking in the dominant frame of policymakers. Also, these advocates that can make this distinctive impact have been part of the new society long enough to know the system, to know the structures of policymaking. So what Giddens called practical consciousness. They understand the system, but at the same time, they're also outsiders. So this simultaneous presence of being insider and outsider, which is identified by Edward Said as a condition of in-betweenness, being always between the past structures of the home country and the present structures in the new country boosts reflection and serves as a potential for originality. And it's that it also allows the constant negotiation of the status quo. So this means that these advocates are able to contribute to policymaking and can think along with policymakers when there are structures that allow for mutual learning. So to think about these structures, we use this spaces, the participatory spaces of Gaventa. So we see that many advocates are currently not directly involved in advising policy, because often these spaces for policymaking are closed spaces. But even within invited spaces, so when they are invited to the table, for instance, to speak at a meeting or participate in a commission, this does not mean that there's an actual inclusion of perspective of refugees. In invited spaces, there are various implicit mechanisms of exclusion at work. I will only name two of the ones we described. The first is the strong focus on this individual story that I was talking about earlier, makes the added value of embedded stories invisible. And so, in fact, it reduces the role of advocates who are not so much asked to think along, but rather to illustrate existing ideas with their stories. And the other is the dominant notion of objectivity. So many people link objectivity to having sufficient distance from a subject, which means that when it comes to issues such as inclusion, integration, or reception, experts such as scientists or advisors without a displacement background are often considered more objective than refugee experts because they have more distance. And this assumption, of course, underestimates the fact that all perspectives, also of people that do not have refugee background, are always historically shaped and situated in specific life worlds. So we need a different idea of objectivity that recognizes this situatedness. So as long as the added value of in-betweenness of advocates is not recognized, they cannot develop into fully fledged discussion partners. So we need a different kind of spaces, co-created spaces that are controlled. Sorry, no, I skipped the created spaces. These are spaces controlled by refugees, but they are very rare, like spaces in which they invite, for instance, policymakers to participate in it. But we don't see them often. So we argue that actually what we need is co-created spaces between refugees and policymakers, in which people from institutions that aim to work with refugees can also really learn to become aware of these underlying mechanisms of exclusion. And these co-created spaces, I'm nearly finished, should be designed as daring spaces in which it becomes possible for participants from different positions to compare their experiences. So in those spaces that we call co-created spaces, there is both respect for different position and the possibilities of spotting one's own blind spots through a different lens. So an appreciation of polyphony is essential for this. Polyphony implies that there is actual admission of a diversity of voices, and especially those voices that are considered deviant, which become actually valued for their situatedness. Otherwise, people with a different perspective might just choose to keep it to themselves and conform to the dominant view. So this is to conclude. Going back to the distinction by Anne Phillips I made at the beginning, for policymaking that is more responsive to the needs of refugees, we need both a politics of presence that actually allows the presence of advocates in policymaking context, and a politics of ideas where ideas and experiences that might be unsettling are not prevented from emerging by implicit mechanisms of exclusion. And we also need attention for co-created spaces as sources of belonging, because in these spaces, there is appreciation and recognition for the contribution that refugees can bring, so for this in-betweenness. And because the places that we belong, that we consider homes, are also places that we can contribute to shape. And this is one thing that distinguishes a place where we are home from a place where we are just guests. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Elena. Perfectly on time. If you share your PowerPoint, then I would like to invite the audience, the attendees, to share their questions about Elena's presentation in the chat. In the meanwhile, Elena can read them and then answer them during the panel discussion. For now, I think it is best that Mimi goes ahead and shares the screen. Maybe you should say something about yourself as well. Elena, I'm sorry I didn't give you the chance to say something about you. You are the postdoc. You are the assistant professor at this moment at the sociology department and the coordinator together with Kai of Refugee Academy. And your background is in philosophy. You have studied philosophy and organizational anthropology. So maybe go ahead, share your screen and introduce yourself and start with your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Halle. I hope you can all see my screen. Can you, yes,
we do.
sharing?
Yes,
great,
we do.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, welcome here. I'm Mimi Ocadis. I'm a PhD candidate within the project and guest fellowship, Narratives of Change.
Mimi, your voice is not that good. Maybe you can come closer.
Oh, there? Is it better?
Yes.
Great. And yes, welcome to my presentation entitled Lobo Koyamama, Homemade Recipes of Belonging. In case my voice goes off, please let me know and I will try to fix that. And to start, I want to invite you for a little exercise with me. And I want you to imagine the texture of deep fried dough, how it is crunchy on the outside, but nicely soft on the inside. And also the aroma of ginger and garlic when you mix it with the saltiness of fried fish. and the heat of spices like cardamom and cinnamon, black pepper. Please try to imagine the flavor, the texture, the temperatures. I hope you had breakfast before this, because this presentation is about this connection between bodily sensations, emotions, and belonging, all bridged by delicious food. Food shared by the PE ladies, and this is a group of 8 forced migrant women from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda that are currently living in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. And this presentation is about them as rifle, resourceful, and resilient authors of meaningful knowledge about food in time of corona crisis. And taking care of their privacy by using pseudonyms selected by themselves, I want to introduce to you these women, or as they are called, societal respect in many African societies, Mama. So Mama Linda, Anita, Suminat, Nazar, Petroni, Leopoldine, Karen, and Jojot. And this presentation is very much a humble gesture of gratitude to these women for their trust and their generosity, for sharing their knowledge with me, and now allowing me to share it with you as a broader audience. So with their permission, I want to give you a taste of their knowledge in this presentation by focusing on how these women recreate a sense of belonging to the enjoyment of cooking and sharing food. And this presentation is based on the project Food for Change. And this is an engaged project with 2 main aims. First, to address a concern raised by forced migrants themselves. Secondly, to work as close as possible with forced migrant communities in every step of the project in order to collect, curate, and co-create their narratives together. And in the country of South Africa, where in May 2020 the government implemented a very strict lockdowns, the PE ladies, as many other migrants who rely on informal work, struggle to have regular income as forced migrants that often lack proper documentations. They are at the margins of the formal labor market, just to mention some elements of their societal exclusion they experience. Thus, we decided to focus on a major concern for them at that precise moment, which was to have food on their tables on a daily basis. So the project encouraged and supported the women to share cooking recipes of their choice while remunerating them for their expenses. So we adopted methodological steps that could adapt to the women's busy schedules. We use WhatsApp as an affordable and accessible platform where we have 3 rounds of recipe exchange in which the woman and I use photos, audio, text, videos to show the ingredients that were used, the cooking steps that they will follow, and how they share and enjoy their meals with their loved ones. And it was also followed by a group discussion and one-to-one conversation also through WhatsApp. And the idea here was to engage with their experiences of the pandemic, with narratives that could challenge taking for granted images of forced migrants as victims or as a threat, to then highlight their agency, so how they also are able to take their own decisions and take the lead, and their resilience, how they are able to adapt and handle difficult circumstances. And more specifically, Food for Change was not about re-emphasizing their very real problems, but instead they wanted to focus on different stories about warm textures and colorful dishes, good smells, families around the table. They wanted to focus on stories about food. And food in this project, it goes beyond the idea that it's a daily duty, but that it's also a key element in migrants' experiences of belonging. And here I engage with the work of anthropologist Emma Jane Abbott, as she states that migration brings an individual's sense of being and belonging into a state of flux, as they become pulled in multiple directions and subjected to a range of influences and changes in their everyday life. They have to reconstruct their identities and relations. Food play a significant role in anchoring a migrant while also enabling the creation of new subjectivities and orientations. And here, actually, I would like to take a little bit of a step further in regard to the particular nature of this project, because while COVID imposed several restrictions like forced isolation, as we rely on online means, it also offered the possibility for the women to share their stories in a very intimate space that is their home kitchens. where the recipes were described in relation to very personal, sensorial, and emotional experiences. And in this sense, I want to add the notion of the visceral politics of food, where the visceral pay attention to sensations, to moods, to how we engage sensorially with our environments. And by focus on the visceral, and therefore also on emotions and sensations, I follow the perspective of South African feminist Cecilia Lewis, as she argues that food is not only a functional and nutritious source for ensuring productive bodies. Food is also linked to feelings, agencies, and pleasures that extend our conventional understanding of the dimensions of freedom. So with this focus on food and feelings, it can be appreciated how a constant in all the recipes shared by the women, it was the element of enjoyment, how they found and practiced enjoyment in selecting, cooking, and sharing recipes with their loved ones. So I suggest here to read engagement as a practice of belonging that was expressed in three layers. First, enjoyment was the main motivation for the women to choose which recipes they wanted to cook and share in this project. Mama Karen, for example, described how she learned to cook a new dish for her family and included in the project because it is simply delicious. She says, one of my friends from Ghana showed me how to cook it. One day she cooked it and my children liked it. That's why I cook it today, because it's their favorite. And after this enjoyment was not only about this instant pleasure sensorial experience, but also about how certain dishes, along with their senses, evoke really joyful memories of loved ones, of meaningful places, and good old days before Corona. And a good example comes from Mama Anita, as she says, I love this recipe. I chose it because my grandfather had a very big farm of goats and cows. He used to call his people on weekends a slaughter one. We enjoyed to the fullest. Whenever I think of home, I remember him because he was like our father and grandfather at the same time. Then a second level of enjoyment is that it was a fundamental element in the cooking process itself. The women tend to describe the recipes in a not such a structured way. They didn't really mention specific cooking times or exact measurements for the ingredients, but instead they describe more of an intuitive and playful way of cooking that rely heavily on their senses. For instance, Mama Nasser said, these are the spices, garlic, green pepper, onion. Everything is getting soft. And what is going soft, you have to add another spice like Maggi. Add it and let it boil. After 10 or 20 minutes, you have to taste it. Taste if it's nice. And then you know if it's ready. So from this perspective, we can see how the women know when a meal is ready, when they taste it, and if these tastes bring joy, they know they have succeeded in their cooking. And thirdly, enjoyment was the ultimate outcome of all shared recipes and of the project itself. Probably the most emotive moment in the project came from how the women show the way they enjoyed the recipes themselves, but also their loved ones. All of them share pictures and videos of food, of tables full of food with fresh drinks and fruits and desserts, with families and friends gathering around it. And even more, this share of enjoyment was also translated into the online, as the women described their pleasant sensations and encouraged each other to imagine, to really recreate the enjoyment of eating. And a good example comes from Mama Petroni, and she was actually make me like teasing me with sosoya makasi, a traditional Congolese dish. I want to share with you what she says about it.
There, my chicken is done. You can see my chicken. Wow. Yes. I add my tomato in my chicken. Just put water a little bit. Don't put water like see. No. It's a sauce. So my chicken is done. Oh la la. Mimi, I wish you could be here so we can eat together. Sorry for that, Mimi. Yeah, my chicken is done. I finished with my chicken.
Yeah, and indeed, she made me really jealous with that. And as she does, she illustrates how the women develop a dynamic where their different narratives, their different recipes enter into dialogue, where they co-create together a space where they could share enjoyment, online and offline. An enjoyment that actually was generous enough to reach me all the way here in the Netherlands and allow me to also be a sort of co-creator in their playful dialogue. And as the women enjoy themselves and they share joy, I argue that they invite us to see how food indeed supports the negotiation of home recreation for them, but not just as an anchor, but as something more malleable. So I suggest to see food as a sort of rhizome for these migrant women that is strongly grounded, but also full of flexible branches and roots that grow and flourish in different directions, just as the cassava, a staple crop for these women. And if we appreciate how the women involve elements of enjoyment in choosing what to cook, in preparing dishes that are close to their hearts, and especially by sharing food with others, we can see how joyful practices around foods actually recreates these flexible roots that support a sense of belonging, that expand from their home countries. So, for instance, how Mama Anita mentioned that grilled meat relates to her grandpa, to their sense of connection that they build with new things. So, how Mama Karen now introduced a Ghanaian dish in the diet of her family, and also helps them to create connections across difficulties. And here I want to mention an example that came from how there were certain tensions at the beginning of the project because Mama Anita is the only one with a Ugandan background in a group made of mainly Congolese women. However, in the third run, we decided to cook each other's recipes, and Mama Petroni actually chose to cook a Ugandan dish. And later on, as she reflected on the project in our group discussion, she mentions that in the life we live, when someone approaches you, don't be indifferent. Just take it easy. Listen to what they want to tell you, and you just know how to make friends. I think all of us know how from the beginning there was some problem with our mama Anita. But now we learn something. When there is love, everything will be perfect and easy. And now in our project, everything was going well. We didn't think about those things we were talking before. We're like a family for this project. And while this brings such a positive note, I think it's important to also highlight that this project is not meant to show the women's cooking narratives as overwhelmingly positive or simply perfect, because as I mentioned, there were some real tensions as well. And the focus on food here, unfortunately, does not simply erase the very real issues that are related to deep structures of exclusion. However, as a form of conclusion, I want to highlight that this appreciation of enjoyment around food allows us to see that these are women with agency, that are able to step beyond the simplistic images of forced migrants as victims to then claim a space in the middle of a pandemic to enjoy themselves and bring joy, nourishment, and a sense of belonging to others, which actually follows Cecilia Lewis as she argues for the importance of acknowledging how women's agencies as cooks and feeders can create sustaining relational bonds, generating a sense of security, well-being, and contentment, both for the cooks themselves as well as for those they feed. Which brings me right back to the title of this presentation, Loboko ya Mama, which literally means the hands of a mother. And this is a Lingala phrase that refers to good food, to delicious food made by the loving mother to bring joy and love to others. So thank you for your attention. I hope the presentation made you hungry for some delicious African dishes. Because we have created a recipe book together, and you can find more details about it on the website of this project. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mimi, for this great presentation. I am getting hungry, so for sure. Please go ahead and put your questions for Mimi in the chat, and she can read it before we start the panel discussion. I see already that Ernst van de Hemel has put a question for Elena. Thank you so much, Ernst. hope the others also engage with us through chat. This is a bit difficult to not see you actually, but you are seeing us and hear us. So chat is the only way that we can feel your engagement. So really hope that you will engage with us through chat. And then we come back to it during the panel discussion. Alex, could you please upload your presentation or share your screen, share your PowerPoint, and also introduce yourself.
Okay, so I hope you can hear me well. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandra Green, and I'm a PhD candidate at the VU Amsterdam. Today, I'm joining you from Vancouver, where it's now around 1:10 a.m. So I apologize if I'm not my sharpest. This morning, I'll be discussing community organizing around education in City Heights, San Diego, and the ways in which belonging is cultivated through deep coalition. So this presentation will highlight a collaboration with the Parent Student Resident Organization, or PSRO. The PSRO is a refugee-led parents and community coalition comprising 12 language groups advocating for healthy students, supportive schools, and educational equity in City Heights. To situate this organizing work a little, City Heights is a neighborhood in San Diego that is home to 95,000 residents from 70 countries. Within this complex landscape, nonprofits, ethnic and community-based organizations, and highly engaged residents dedicate their expertise, experience, and passion to the community. During COVID-19, the importance of this community work has been magnified. This collaboration thus aims toward identifying the challenges that this pandemic presents to City Heights residents on the one hand, and highlighting the resilience, joy, and leadership of refugee communities in City Heights on the other. Envisioned as an expression of solidarity, this contribution offers a window into the lived experiences of 4 refugee households in City Heights, with an aim toward making visible the critical organizing work of this community. So why education? While whereas San Diego County's approach to refugee resettlement has recognized the importance of housing, language acquisition, and employment, education has remained largely absent on policy agendas. Yet for many families, education is the first point of contact in a new community. Among City Heights, Crawford, and Hoover cluster schools, encompassing 23 elementary, middle, and high school sites, there are between 2,000 and 3,000 refugee students enrolled, the vast majority of whom are English language learners who have experienced interruptions in their formal education. While policymakers have been slow to respond, parents, grassroots, community, and ethnic-based organizations have organized around their own vision for education in community schools. In this way, the PSRO is an example of a created space, as Elena explained, as well as a co-created space, but more on this part later. So in spring, summer 2020, 4 refugee households, a community organizer within the PSRO, a trusted community translator and interpreter, and myself gathered together on Zoom every 2 weeks to have collective dialogues. During these dialogues, we discussed the photos, videos, and voice memos that were shared in a private WhatsApp group, guided by curiosity and a desire to know one another better. As well, I had one-to-one meetings with participants where we reflected on the project as a whole and also discussed how to go public with the content and stories that were shared. We're also in the midst of organizing a storytelling event to reflect on the arc of the project over the past year and these many months of COVID. During this time, we'll also launch a website where the various stories will be archived. The website will be available in English, Swahili, and in Arabic. So although the women in this project organized through the PSRO, they had not yet all had the opportunity to get to know one another intimately and learn details about each other's lives. So there are various reasons for this. For example, language. The women in this project organized within different language groups: Arabic, Swahili, English, and Kizigua. care responsibilities. Prior to COVID, the PSRO would gather in person. Not everyone could attend these larger group meetings if, for example, they had to arrange childcare. But during COVID-19, PSRO meetings, as well as this project, were hosted online, inviting us into each other's homes, into kitchens and bedrooms and living rooms. Complex histories. Some communities within the PSRO have complex histories of harm, which are, for example, connected to conflict in their countries of origin or trauma experienced at some point in their migration journeys. With this in mind, the PSRO has developed an approach to co-creation centered upon humility, which allows different communities, sometimes with complex histories, to come together in deep coalition. This approach involves recognizing each community member has experienced trauma, which may be triggered by words or references to the histories of countries or tribes or to particular migration journeys, and allowing individuals to share the aspects of their lives that they wish to share and how it can relate to improving the current conditions of the community. By providing language-based meeting environments, individuals and groups can meet and share experiences in the language they feel comfortable in before coming together in broader collective dialogues. So in her work on deep coalition, referring to coalitions that go beyond short-term interest-based alliances, Maria Lugones writes beautifully about the practices of playfulness, world traveling, and loving perception. For Lugones, these practices honor plurality, complexity, and non-dominant differences, and may be used to nurture cross-cultural and cross-racial loving relationships, particularly among women of color. This practice mirrors what Jackie Alexander refers to as learning each other. In her book, Pedagogies of Crossing, Alexander urges us to resist and unlearn an impulse that allows mythologies about each other to replace actually knowing one another, to never cease yearning for each other's company. The approach of the PSRO's organizing invites a similar process of learning each other, which enables the type of interdependency necessary to cultivate community belonging and build deep coalition. So with this in mind, this collaboration with the PSRO takes an approach that is curiosity-driven and desire-based, an approach that is trauma-informed and yet not damage-centered. According to Eve Tuck, an Unanga scholar, damage-centered research is research that operates even benevolently from a theory of change that establishes harm or injury in order to achieve reparation. For those who are not familiar with this term, a theory of change refers to a comprehensive description of long-term goals and the conditions that must unfold in order to meet those goals. While a theory of change helps to position the ethical stance of a project, it can also contribute to damage-centered research, whereby pain and loss are documented in order to obtain particular political or material gains and demand accountability. Though damage-centered research may be done with the best of intentions and may be socially and historically contextualized, meaning that it may look at historical exploitation, domination, and colonization of communities, the danger in damage-centered research is that it is a pathologizing and problem-centered approach in which oppression is used to define a community, and the so-called problem is located within the bodies and minds of community members. As well, while damage-centered research may be used strategically by oppressed communities to help leverage resources in the short term, Tuck argues that it is necessary to consider the long-term repercussions of thinking about communities as broken, depleted, ruined, and hopeless. Tuck argues that an alternative to damage-centered research is to craft our research to capture desire instead of damage. According to Tuck, desire-based research frameworks are concerned with understanding complexity, contradiction, and the self-determination of lived lives. Desire-based frameworks aim to account for loss and despair, but also the hope, the visions, and the wisdom of lived lives and communities. In presenting desire as another option for the way we approach research and collaboration, Tuck invites us to consider what might happen if we departed from desire rather than from damage or from deficit. So in the time that I have left, I want to spotlight an important theme in the project, this being language justice. So according to PSRO community members, when local schools communicate important updates, they will always do so in English. And if, and this is a big if, they do offer a translation, it is almost always offered only in Spanish. This corresponds to a fiction that persists in California, that new arrivals are only Spanish speakers. Yet new arrivals are not only Spanish speakers, as demonstrated by the PSRO, which organizes in 12 language groups: Arabic, Burmese, Farsi, French, Karen, Kinyarwanda, Kisagua, Lingala, Somali, Spanish, Swahili, and Vietnamese. And still, these languages are only a fraction of the more than 45 languages and 100 dialects spoken in City Heights. For years, the PSRO has organized in order to have languages other than English and Spanish recognized by the school district. And during COVID-19, language justice in the context of accurate information has been vital in order to prevent the spread of misinformation and keep families healthy. So this slide shows a selection of photos shared by the 4 project participants. In the photo on the left, we see Dima's daughter following an online class. The photo in the center shows Marie with her daughter Francine at Francine's high school graduation in 2020. In our last group dialogue, Marie shared how happy and proud she and her family were of Francine, who is the first in her family to graduate from high school. Francine now attends university in San Diego. Next, at the top right, we see a photo of Famo's 2 children and 2 of her nieces taken during the early days of the pandemic, when there was still lots of excitement around online schooling. Finally, the bottom right, we see 3 of Rawa's children following their classes online. During the pandemic, Dima, Marie, Famo, and Rawa have had to navigate having and losing and finding jobs, being mothers and caregivers, acting as teachers as they assist their children with their online schooling, and being students themselves. Dima, Marie, and Rawa are English language learners, and Famo is a student at UC San Diego. The ladies described that managing these different roles and responsibilities was at times too much, and that they sometimes felt overwhelmed, especially when they themselves could not help their children with their homework if, for example, they are still learning English. And yet it is necessary not to overemphasize this challenge of being a language learner or force mixed emotions into damage-centered narratives. As Eve Tuck reminds us, even when communities are broken and conquered, they are so much more than that. So much more that this incomplete story is an act of aggression. Indeed, representing the women in this project and the PSRO as anything other than multiply positioned and complex would be a form of violence. There's pain, but there's also joy. There is care. There is a shared commitment to justice and to one another. So I want to wrap up my presentation with a reflection from Famo, which she shared with me during a one-to-one conversation. Through this project, I got to work with people that I wouldn't normally work with. I knew the translator. I met her like once or twice when she came to PSRO, not the regular meetings, the dialogue, the big dialogues where she would come to translate. And then I know Marie from coming to the other meetings, but I never seen the other ladies before, even though they probably came to PSRO meetings as well. But I didn't know them. I wasn't like paying attention or looking for them. But now I got to actually be in meetings with them and got to know a little more, something about their lives, that normally I wouldn't know all the things I learned about them. So that's definitely something to think about. Indeed, it is something to think about. During COVID-19, the PSRO was able to ensure that students in the community had access to Wi-Fi and working laptops or tablets at home. They documented challenges and developed collective recommendations around 4 themes: parent support, student support, technology, and institutional issues. They organized online meetings with school counselors, school board members, and principals to ensure a safe and equitable return to in-class learning. In short, they organized around their own vision for education in community schools. This project thus offered an extremely humble contribution to the incredible organizing work of this dedicated community by providing an opportunity for folks to meet outside of their organizing space and share stories, share struggles, share joys, as well as tactics for navigating this new online education space. So I'm very grateful to have been part of a project and a collaboration that allowed us to learn each other and travel to each other's worlds in order to nurture the type of interdependency and coalition necessary for organizing work. And on that note, I want to thank you all for your attention and time. And once again, this is the link to our website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for giving this great presentation in the middle of your night. Thank you. And it was very interesting and refreshing to hear you, that you can be so lively in the middle of the night. I want to also ask again if you have any questions or remarks for Alex's presentation, please put it on in the chat. I already see some comments for Mimi and Elena. Thank you so much. So there is a lively conversation going on via chat, which is I'm very happy about it. I would also ask all attendees if you would want to also at the end of this session, towards the end, to share with us what you take away from this session, so that we can also share it with the organizers for the newsletter. If anything, one line or two, what did you learn? What are the points you take away? What you liked about the presentations? I would like to now give the floor to Fabian, the last presentation for this session. Fabian, would you share your PowerPoint and also please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think it's shared now. Hello, everyone. Very honored to be here in this virtual conference. My name is Fabian Holle. I have a background in theater and performance, and I'm a very recent PhD candidate. And Halle Gorashi and Elena Ponzoni are my supervisors at the VU Amsterdam. I also consider myself a part of the Rotterdam queer community, where I performed as a drag queen, and was also part of a group that co-organized safer clubbing spaces for gender non-conforming queer people and allies. I will talk a bit about Art for Change, which is a creative knowledge co-creation in collaboration with 10 queer artist participants with a forced migration background in the Netherlands. Excuse me. It was part of a research project that also included biographical interviews. At first, we intended to do biographical interviews and also participant observation, but then the pandemic happened, and yeah, we had to come up with creative ways to stay in engagement. Therefore, we interviewed 11 queer artists with a forced migration background and asked them to create remunerated artistic works about their experiences during COVID-19. 10 out of these 11 accepted the offer and created our artistic works, and we had then conversations as well about their works. Some of them make art for a living, others do not consider their works to be art. So to be more inclusive, our focus was on art practices. So then you don't have to, be in a discussion of what is considered art, which can be exclusionary in itself. I also speak on behalf of Maria Rast, PhD candidate in our project, since the research was also really a collaboration with her. And together with Maria and Halle Gorashi, we wrote an article that was recently published and describes how art practices, such as those presented here, can unsettle dominant exclusionary Dutch societal assumptions. In this presentation, I will focus on queerness, or how I see queerness and art as transnational practices of belonging. At the end, I will also briefly address some complexities and challenges for co-creation projects like this one within academia. So to give you some idea of the kind of artworks, I created this slide, but it really does not do justice to the work. So feel free to watch them yourselves on the website. These are just some snippets, which I will very quickly point out, starting at the top left, visual podcast series, some graphic designs, grinder poetry, drag video performance, DJ set, decolonizing DJ sets, The Voice of the Queer is a song, a performance, video poem, and text, and also an audio play, which is not visible on this slide. So the artist participants could create whatever they wanted to create and decide how much time and energy they wanted to invest. And they were also free to share their works wherever and however they saw fit. And in collaboration with them, the artistic works and parts of our conversations were then published on the website of the research project. I would love to talk about all the artworks, but there's simply no time. So I intend to relate art practices to queerness and explain them as transnational practices of belonging. When I think of practices of belonging in relation to this project, I think I need to address non-belonging first. The participants all have very different intersecting identity markers, such as being Muslim, Black, white, trans, gender non-conforming, activist, artist, having a refugee background ranging from Northwest Africa to the former Soviet Union. So the participants share experiences of multiple belongings and non-belongings at the same time, or rather non-properly belongings to, for example, white heterosexual cisgender Dutch communities, or heterosexual cisgender communities of their origin countries in the Netherlands, or even to mainstream cisgender lesbian, gay, and bisexual communities. Fatima El Tayeb also writes about this not properly belonging to different communities because of exclusionary societal assumptions. So, for example, being perceived as not properly Muslim, not properly Black, not properly gay, properly female, or properly male. So many participants are this sort of situated in between. Also with regards to gender, most of them, or actually all of them, were gender non-conforming, and most of them were also non-binary trans. So they negotiate multiple belongings in the Netherlands, but also they oftentimes are connected beyond national borders through virtual queer networks, social media a lot. So I think that many participants' queerness can be seen as practices of belonging to these transnational queer communities. There's also like some literature about the rainbow flag, for example, as a symbol of this transnationalism, which is also contested by many people in the queer community itself. But LGBTQI plus people experience marginalization, exclusion, and violence in many different local contexts. Jose Medina, a professor of philosophy, talks about the notion of shared responsibility and concern in the struggle towards justice. They say, in this way, different publics are brought together as a community of shared concerns, rather than as a community of shared identities, a la Taylor, or as a community of agreements, a la Habermas, or of disagreements, a la Mouffe. Because if you would think in terms of shared identities, agreements, or disagreements, participants in this study would hardly belong to any community. So instead, participants practice solidarity with these border-crossing queer communities of shared concerns. And one way of doing that, of creating and strengthening or building such queer communities was through art, through art practices. An example of this border-crossing solidarity was the project Queer Revolution Morocco. During the pandemic, there was a wave, it was in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a wave of outing LGBTQI plus people in Morocco. So heterosexual people created fake profiles on gay dating apps and took pictures of queer people there and shared them on social media. And a lot of these outed queer people were stuck with their families at that moment because it was lockdown. So in response, some participants in Art for Change who felt very connected with them but were very far away created a work group they called Queer Revolution Morocco. And Sadika says this about it. The idea is to gather the arts in one platform and use hashtags to do it. So every person is asked to share their support or their revolution through art. It was singing, it was makeup art, drag, writing, all different forms of art. Anyone that can show their queer revolution was able to share it. Also, the song that Sadika wrote and performed in Art for Change was part of this queer revolution in Morocco. So many people contributed their art from different parts of the world. Outside of this specific movement, some artists also created political performances to express experiences of exclusion, of non-belonging, and ambiguity. And this text is a short fragment of a voiceover in the performance Labjika Ya Hussein by Mala Badi, which was performed and recorded in Munich, Germany. And the event was organized by a fellow friend of Mala, who's also queer, trans, activist, artist, and has refugee backgrounds. I think it illustrates the multiple belongings and non-properly belongings Mala experiences as queer, feminist, Muslim, trans, and activist very eloquently. People have always insisted on asking me, no shame, are you really Muslim and at the same time you're a man? Are you really Muslim while wearing those clothes? Don't you think you're contradicting yourself? Are you really Muslim and practicing feminism? Are you really Muslim and queer? How can you be Muslim wearing those faggoty feminine clothes? It continues, but this is just a small part. So Mala claims actually these multiple belongings, being Muslim, being feminist and queer at the same time, even though society excludes them for not properly belonging. So by negotiating and sharing art within and outside their queer refugee communities, locally as well as transnationally, participants trigger reflection for themselves, but also for the audiences about identity and about places in the world, making them agents of societal change, as well as key figures in their respected communities. Someone to follow and engage with by fellow queers on social media, for example, but also locally at demonstrations or at creative events, creating a sense of belonging for themselves and building community at the same time. Also, Gano mentions the importance of creating community through art. My art, my music, my painting, my writing is my way of activism, is my way of fighting. I'm actually painting to heal as a way of resistance against everything that's going wrong in my life with the system. Also with the music, it's like decolonizing the spaces, bringing back cultures and creating community. With the writing, it's the same. It's vocalizing things, the struggles, sharing and connecting. Gano and many participants use art then as a universal language to counter experiences of being silenced due to their marginalization within marginalization. So instead of having to express themselves with conventional language, such as English or Dutch, often their third, fourth, or even fifth languages, participants use art as a universal border crossing language. So to sum up, participants experience or claim multiple belongings while different contexts exclude them for not properly belonging. They negotiate queerness, art, and solidarity to connect with shared struggles of marginalization and shared concerns for justice. Art practices have thus the capacity to build and strengthen transnational communities, but also local communities, both virtually and physically. So lastly, I would like to say something about the co-creation process itself as a space where practices of belonging can be further questioned, developed, shared, or critically addressed within academia. So after this project, we came together as a group and discussed with Art for Change, the participants, and discussed possibilities and desires for further collaborations. Then an idea developed for an art event that centers queer and trans artists with the refugee backgrounds. So I'm currently co-writing an arts funding application together with the artist participants in Art for Change. I have a background in theater, as I said, and my role is now to co-write this application and do other matters of production when it's ongoing. And by doing it together, so the interested group members who might want to do things in the future like this can also learn from how to write such documents by co-writing them and get some ins and outs on what Dutch art funding bodies might expect from them. So in this way, we try to be reciprocal and facilitate spaces where knowledge and art can be co-created, co-curated, and co-produced by forming connections between academia and society. So spaces where complexities around representation on who gets to speak, on which terms, who benefits, who has the power of framing, interpretation, decision-making, can be reflected on in a very direct way. Such complexities can be critically addressed by, for example, shifting much of the decision-making power towards participants in a study and decentering the role of the researcher, following the lead of study participants in what is important for them in terms of topics, themes, but also in approach by using, for example, an arts-based research method. So we can use academic resources to make participants' art and struggles more visible and create sustainable platforms where practices of belonging can be critically addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fabian, the wonderful presentation. Just to give a bit more context to these presentations, the last three presentations, as I mentioned, all of them are part of our project, Engaged Scholarship and Narratives of Change, which is a Vichy project. I am the PI of the project. And as you can imagine, last year has been a very challenging year for Engaged Scholarship. So all three researchers that you have heard now, Mimi, Alex, and Fabian, were preparing their fieldwork in 2020, beginning of 2020, and then pandemic happened. So what they did is that actually they were challenged through their engagement as engaged scholars with the field of the research, not being able to do the field work in person. So they showed an enormous resilience and resourcefulness and did their research online, which you saw actually now and in the presentation, and they showed a high level of engagement. I am very proud of it as the PI of the project, what they have done so far. So that is something I wanted to share with you as a context. And the same kind of challenge we had also as in the Refugee Academy, because engagement through online presentations is always challenging when you want to create daring spaces, especially. But you can see there has been the links to the Refugee Academy website and Engaged Scholarship website through the chat, so feel free to visit them if you want to know more about our projects. Now I want to give the floor to Kai to lead the discussion, the panel discussion based on the questions you raised already, and Kai will start by introducing himself properly.
Yes, thank you very much, Halle. And welcome everybody to this panel on co-creation and engaged scholarship. My name is Kai Mars, and I have a background in queer geography and cultural anthropology. And I'm now involved within the Refugee Academy as a junior researcher, and together with Elena Ponsoni, I'm also a coordinator of the Refugee Academy. I saw in the chat that there were already several questions, but please, if you have any other questions, feel free to still send them in. And maybe also even afterwards, if you still have questions, feel free to also send us an email. I think the first question was directed to Elena, but perhaps it is also interesting for the other panelists. It was a question from Ernst van den Hemel, and I will just read the question. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, Elena. You and other researchers in your fascinating project have highlighted the possibilities of challenges of collaborative practices and places. I would love to hear more about how such initiatives work on a micro level, so to speak. Could you perhaps illustrate a bit some of the successes and challenges of collaborative practices / spaces? So Elena.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Halle can also, of course, fill in maybe because she also did this research with me, and this is a subject in which she's very much expert. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's nice to be invited to give some examples from the research, since the presentation was quite theoretical and didn't have much space for examples. In this project, we did not so much research co-created spaces in the work, because actually between refugee advocates and policymakers, there are at the moment not really these co-created spaces. So what we do in the project is showing the potentiality of them on the basis of the data we have, and especially the experience of advocates. What we see is that there are very important insights from this knowledge and experience of advocates that do not find their way in at this moment to policymakers. And to give one example of that, there is a refugee-led organization that works a lot with newcomers who want to continue their education in the Netherlands. And yeah, about the obstacles that have a lot to do with the inflexibility of the educational system in the Netherlands. So what they do now is very much yeah, help students to overcome these obstacles, but they have a lot of ideas and insights and solutions that could be very relevant. And actually one of our co-researchers who's a refugee advocate himself, as part of this research, also talked to people from ministry, and they were extremely interested actually in these ideas. But then you see that the actual the actual participation of these type of advocates in policymaking is really hard, because, for instance, there is a big NGO that is considered the interlocutor actually for policymakers, and they have they really want also to include and to bring refugee voice, to include that in their own lobby. But what you see is actually that what happens is then that the lobby is already designed actually, and then refugee advocates are invited to participate, but in fact they are invited to illustrate this lobby with their own experience. So you see that this, with all the good intention, these co-creative spaces do not really happen. There was some other things I wanted to say, but yeah, and so what we did, just to finish quickly, for instance, is we had meetings with refugee advocates from older generations and younger generations. And then you see actually that there are so many experiences of exclusion, even when they feel actually invited to participate, but still of not being taken seriously, that emerge into this space that is actually really considered by them as a safe space, because there is not the presence of people from institutions. And so the point is we should organize these daring spaces in which there is both the safety to unsettle and enough sense of comfort by people from institution listening to these unsettling experiences to allow this unsettlement. We've been experimenting actually with co-creative spaces in other projects, also with Halle masterclasses that we did with refugees and policymakers. You know, Halle, if you want maybe to say something about that.
I don't think we have enough time to do that. I think we can share some stories online in the project. We have, for example, Sarah's stories. I couldn't find it so quickly, but maybe Kai can try to find it and share it. I want to give others the floor to react to the question.
Yes, thank you, Elena, for addressing the question. Now I want to go back to Mimi's presentation, and in the chat there were two questions for you, Mimi. One about if you also encountered negative emotions, and one that was more focused on gender and how, for example, men would relate to cooking as a form of belonging. Could you quickly also address these questions, please?
Sure, I will try to do it in the limit of the time we have. Thank you both for your questions.
You're not, come closer to the microphone.
Yes, the first one about encounter of negative emotions. Yes, indeed, we found it. But that I will say, yeah, staying in the realm of food, it was very bittersweet. Like we will tell, like, yeah, we select certain dishes or we enjoy certain dishes because remind us of the communities we cannot see at the moment. For instance, a woman say, yeah, we share this meal because it's a meal we used to eat after church, and now that's not possible, or about their mothers or family members, they are deceased, or they are in Congo and they cannot see them, or in Uganda they cannot see them at the moment. um, However, I must say there was not always the case. Like I mentioned, enjoyment was always there in all the recipes. Sometimes the women say, yeah, I chose the recipe because I like it, there is no other uh, yeah, like hidden reason about missing something, or I have a sad story around it. And it was also the means of the project to don't force narratives, just reinforce, like, yeah, because they are forced migrants, they should have a sad story linked to everything. But sometimes they were like, no, I just like it and that's it, I'm not gonna say further. And I always respect the women's wishes to share whatever they want or not want to share it. So that's the first question. The second one, that's really interesting. I sort of divided in two about the engagement of the men in the project. Like I said, I followed the community as they organize themselves. So the Congolese community has one organization called M and Co, and it's mothers, mamas from Congo. So they're all women. They organize themselves, and my aim was to cooperate with this organization. So they themselves engage just with women. However, in the project, the men were part of it. Sometimes the men were helping with the cooking. Sometimes the men say, yeah, I want to also share this dish because I like it. Um, and when I say also about the sharing of cook with loved ones, the men also were both the husband, but also friends, male friends, children, teenagers were also part of the dynamic in the enjoyment. So it was not just about this gender. And about the food and cooking and how it expand our understanding of freedom and agency, I think that's a great question. That's why I also highlight the work of Cecilia Lewis, that steps out of like cooking is just a female chore, is a burden to women, but at the same time that the women have the choice to cook for their own sake because they want it, choose whatever they want, and really take be the leaders in their own kitchens. And that also talks about the agency and this as caregivers, and to bring nourishment and this sense of belonging to others. And also gives a lot of power to these women through their cooking knowledge and their cooking practices. I think that's enough for now. So there's also more time for other. But you're always free to email me if you want to discuss further this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mimi, for answering the question. In the chat, there was also another question for Alex and her project. And it was about if you could speak a little bit more about the role of desire in research. Could you, in just a few minutes, answer that question?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. So yes, the author's name is Eve Tuck. She's an indigenous scholar from the Unanga Nation. And in that article, which is called Suspending Damage, A Letter to Communities, she speaks about desire sort of in two ways. One, kind of drawing on Deleuze and Guattari and assemblage theory, but mostly on the work of a scholar named Avery Gordon, who has a book called Ghostly Matters. And in that book, it's a really nice book, I recommend it. Avery Gordon writes about complex personhood. And this is really the heart of desire, really getting at the contradictions that are just a part of being human, how we can desire things that are seemingly oppositional and conflicting, and yet we hold those tensions in our lives every day and walk through the world with that. In the text, she gives an example of working with youth and around critical consciousness, and kind of during the day having these discussions, and then in the evening one night, like accompanying them to the launch of like the newest sneakers. And like that seems so contradictory, like how you have like kind of we're contesting capitalism, and yet we're like buying into this capitalist thing. And a damage-centered narrative would kind of say that like, yeah, it's just like, we're all susceptible to it. It's like a lost cause. But a desire-centered approach like really captures that we can want both things. We can desire this, we can desire to be like critical and work towards that actively, but we can also desire like the newest pair of sneakers. Like that's just the reality. So I really like how Tuck elaborates on that, but it's really rooted in this idea of complex personhood. So.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think there was also another question. Let me see, from Berit. Oh no, excuse me. There was another question to I think it was to all the team, about the different things that happened during like the pandemic. I'm not sure if we have that much time. We have just a few more minutes left, but maybe it's good to mention that we also set up a podcast series, which is called Narratives of Change, and we have one episode in which we invited various scholars. I will also share the link here in the chat, and to discuss about what's the meaning of engaged scholarship, how to do it in times of a pandemic. So I think it's good. I think we don't have much time left here to discuss it, but if you're interested, please, you can find it on the website. I think I have the link here.
Good, but maybe Fabian would like to share some thoughts at the end. You didn't give space to Fabian.
Oh, it's okay. I think we have to close, but
you have 3 minutes still.
About what exactly? About well, I could say something. I thought there was a question that maybe it was the same one from Ernst on the micro level, some challenges and opportunities. What I did experience very briefly is, for example, this thing of power and challenging, and how decentering the role yourself as a researcher is sometimes very complex. For example, in a Zoom where you moderate, because I also, I want to decenter, but it's also like a burden sometimes for others then to take over. So we had like really, and that's what I meant with direct way of challenging these critically, like these things in the moment. And we had some, like sometimes uncomfortable conversations, but very fruitful and very good on the longer term. So now, it deepened, I think, our connection. I'll just leave it at that very quickly. Thank you.
Good. Then maybe I will give the final word to Halle. So back to you. And I think then automatically we will be zoomed out,
yes.
And the panel is over.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your engagement, all the attendees. Sorry not being able to see you. If still you have some lines to share with us, please do. We have 1 more minute left, so we can take it away from here. And I want to thank all the panelists as well to the way they presented their work. I hope we have provided a lot of links that you can engage with us outside this panel, and please connect with us through the website and all the information you can find there. Very happy to be part of this panel as well, to share with you what we are doing in this time of pandemic still. So there are some things coming to the chat, so I stop talking so you can share your thoughts, anything you want to add to the chat. Thank you so much for being with us, and have a great conference for the coming days.